So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Policy Scrutiny Committee. As always, I will start with the Chairman's introduction. I think you guys probably all know this, but I'll read it out anyway. So, this is a meeting of the Council held in public, not a public meeting. Actually, we don't have anyone in the public gallery. There is no fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest the large screen at the front of the room. This one here. And proceed down the fire exit to the courtyard. Once it is safe to return, councillors will receive a text message. Officers will also advise when it is safe to return to the meeting. We are recording the meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will also be available on the council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. And I won't read the if the public are in attendance section, and obviously because no one is in attendance. Thank you. Okay, so next item on the agenda is item 2, declarations of interest. Do any of the members have a declaration of interest? Take that as a no. Okay, cool. Next item, number 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. So can I have a show of hands for those who are at the meeting or who agree that they are an accurate representation of the meeting? Yeah. Okay, so that's unanimous. So on to the agenda items for tonight. So the first one is the rent arrears prevention and recovery policy 24 through 27. I think I'm correct in saying that this will initially be presented by an officer of the council, and then after that we will take questions from members. Given that we've only got 2 items on the agenda tonight, I suggest that we just take questions as we go. Don't necessarily need to go through page by page of the agenda if everyone's happy with that. So if I could hand over now to I think it's Kirsty, you're going to present it, aren't you? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. So the rent arrears prevention and recovery policy has been reviewed with a few minor amendments added to enhance the Council's strong emphasis on prevention and early intervention, particularly in light of the ongoing cost of living crisis and financial pressures residents are facing. There have been no material changes to the recovery process as this remains in line with legislation and best practice. The aim of the policy is to continually improve collection rates, ensuring a sustainable reduction in rent arrears. The rent arrears prevention and recovery policy aims to be firm but fair and considers all tenants in arrears as vulnerable and in need of support. The policy also promotes the principle of early intervention to ensure that tenants are aware of their arrears as soon as they arise, as this will enable the housing rents team to provide the most appropriate support for each individual. The policy also states that the council will only evict tenants as a last resort if they refuse to engage with or use the support services on offer and arrears continue to accrue. The service is developing continually at the moment. The council is moving towards a position of one central view of debt across the authority. The rent arrears service for housing and the arrears service are assimilating to create a more efficient and resource-focused service. This will allow the council to further develop support functions, ensuring that rent arrears can be prevented at the earliest stage and that there is one picture of debt financially across the authority to ensure effective management. This policy will act as a bridging arrangement for the next 18 months through the service assimilation process, so the wider arrears processes can be combined and developed as a greater process across the authority. The policy is really focused on support for tenants to ensure that tenants are supported. An additional welfare officer is in place and recruited. The officer works closely with the council's outreach and engagement team and its partners to improve engagement with tenants and identifying opportunities to maximise household income where possible. With enforcement, the housing rents team undertake various methods of enforcement, and during the pandemic there were limitations around the enforcement action that could be taken. This has however resumed and processes are now being reinstated and rent collection continuing and arrears to be reduced and minimised. We have had throughout the pandemic period lots of challenges with court action being significantly reduced, but again this is now getting back on track and we are now moving through the arrears process. Our tenants, like many in the country, have been affected by increasing bills, and we work very closely with the benefits officers, maximising income through benefits including DHP, signposting to support agencies and working with other agencies to refer for things like fuel vouchers. We also identify where customers have additional needs or require support outside of the normal rent recovery process, and where there could be delays in putting that support in place. So it's a very holistic approach, and it is about having a resident-centred approach, but also about preventing arrears from occurring at the very earliest stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Kirsty. So any questions from the members on the policy? Councillor Myers.
Thank you for that report. So the additional officer is obviously a spend to the council to prevent people going into arrears in the first place. But are they being paid from the recovery rates that do happen when people do fall into arrears?
So all staff spend is budgeted spend, so we have set budgets for, so it's not funded, that would then become, it would go into the rent accounts rather than, it wouldn't then pay for the staff member. Staffing is dealt with in a separate kind of accounting codes.
Thank you. You also mentioned that, of course, you know, the policy in terms of supporting vulnerable residents is very important, stopping from getting into arrears in the first place. But of course, not all residents who rent are classified as vulnerable. So, looking here on page 17, with those who are in significant debts of £5,000 to £10,000, which is a number of cases of 44, where was the outreach to begin with those on this policy? And of course, there are some figures here which are significant amounts of debt, even for just someone who wasn't considered to be vulnerable, between the £500 and £1,000 mark, which could be considered to be 1 or 2 months' worth of rent. So I just wondered whether or not what those figures, in terms of how many of those numbers on this chart, or so this graph on numbers page 17 of the report, are vulnerable residents or those who just don't want to pay.
I wouldn't have the exact figures here of how many are vulnerable, but there's sort of different reasons of why those arrears have built in the first place, so that we would still be taking action on those people in line with the policy.
Okay, does that answer your question? Yeah. Sure. Sorry, Councillor, do you want to make a follow-up comment? Yeah.
I just want to add on to the point that people can have a good income, not defending anyone who's not paying their rent, but if they fall into gambling addiction and they're chasing that, that is another reason why we're seeing rent arrears. So even someone with a reasonable paying job building up rent arrears, if they've got some form of gambling addiction, I would definitely call them vulnerable, or any other forms of addiction. So that outreach work is very important. I know the gambling industry is very weak at the moment, but it's something. Could reach out to that tenant to say, why are you building up these debts? The phone, a gambling website. Let's see how we can help you get that block on. Let's see what support's out there so you can pay your debts off and keep a roof over your heads for your kids and family. I used to work in a social club many moons ago in Dagenham, and I would see on payday guys come in, and one guy put his whole week's wages in that fruit machine. It packed up, and he called for his wife to come down to give him 50 quid, and he carried on putting it in the machine, and when that £50 was gone, he went home because his money ran out, and some guy put 2 quid in and won the jackpot. And that I would put down as a very respectable gentleman who went to work, but if they have that addiction, they are vulnerable.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Myers, you've got a follow-up question? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, of course, addiction does make people vulnerable. I do accept that. But my question was about those who aren't vulnerable and just refuse to pay.
Well, if they refuse to pay, then they know they will be evicted at some point, and recovery processes will be sought. But those people are few and far between, and in this modern digital age, it's no point going to another authority. We can track them down and find them. It's so easy these days to track the bad debts.
Any further questions from the floor? Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you. I think on page 16 we talk about 9,930 tenants, of which 3,748 were in arrears. That's 38% of our tenants in arrears. And then in 2000, on page 17, 2023 and 4, 264 notices of seeking possession, which is 7% of the 3,748, which in itself led to 16 court applications being made. So why such a low figure of notices of seeking possession when 3,748 are in arrears?
Very much due to often vulnerability. We work with social services, there could be children in care orders, we could have people with significant health problems that have lost their jobs, so we try to seek to support people back into a position where they can clear their arrears in the first instance. And actually in the courts there is quite a high burden of threshold that is needed to demonstrate to evict someone. Eviction is not taken easily by the courts, so we have to make sure we have a very robust case in place that the court will actually accept that. So the court thresholds are quite high, so we have to have gone through a significant amount of support. And if someone is vulnerable, that's going to mean making children homeless and such. There has to be an incredibly high threshold for the courts to accept that.
Are you happy with that? Councillor Moore, any further?
Yeah, in terms of the performance target on page 16, we said on 2023 we had arrears reduced to 2,456,000. So we're reducing the debt. We're reducing the debt, but in 23-24 it increased the debt. Yeah. So the highest percentage of arrears within the band 500 to 999 was 19.43%. I guess that's about 715 cases. But the next highest percentage, which is the 3,000 to 5,000, is 15.58%, which is 105 cases. So we've got a situation surely that says the average debt for the 500 to 999.99 pounds is 19.43%, 715 cases. But the bigger debt, which is up to £4,000, is only 105 cases. So what I don't understand is why are we doing a lot of work on the 715 cases rather than the 105, which are worth £3,000 or £4,000?
So often in that middle bracket we are...
Sorry, Councillor Moore's mic's on.
Sorry.
So in that middle category, we've got a much higher chance of preventing the debt at that point, getting those rent arrears down. It's not that the work's not being done on the higher amounts, it's that the higher amounts are harder to bring down when people have already accrued that amount of debt. So the middle cases is often where the debt prevention and the support work can actually be most appropriately put in place. But the work is still being done on those higher numbers, it's just harder to bring them down when people have got into that period of debt.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, Councillor Smith?
Thank you. It's also worth noting that a lot of our tenants are monthly paid, and if you get the 5-week month, which if you're on a low income, you dread that month. It's dredging a small amount of income a lot further, and if there's something they've got to do with that month, it could be the month back to school, and they've got to get kids' uniforms, they might think, I pay a chunk of my rent, but not the full amount. And that happens. Also, that if people are on monthly pay, at the start of the month they're in credit, and by the second, third week of the month and the fourth, they're in debt. So my officer here, Kirsty O'Connell, is absolutely right. that third boundary of debts between 500 and 99, that's where the intervention is.
Yeah.
What is the point of sending letters to someone who doesn't earn a lot of money, but on the last working day of the month, their rent account is pretty much zero in debt, but they're on a minimum wage, they can't pay a month up front because they're on minimum wage, so there's always a little bit of arrear on their account, but on the last working day it's clear we don't need to be sending them letters harassing them because they will pay the rent, but the ones between 500 and £1,000 owing, that's where the intervention's needed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Myers.
Thank you. On page 33 of the policy itself, where we list the Appendix 1 overview of rent arrears recovery process, when it reaches 3 weeks arrears, the options are possible outcomes, balance cleared, vulnerabilities identified. But council insurance team will be advised payments are not being made and they may cancel home and contents insurance held by the council. And then, of course, on 5 weeks arreared, there are items say refer to Citizens Advice, Peabody or other support agencies. So why is that before cancelling insurance for people, for tenants on their homes?
There will be signposted to support throughout from every stage, and the insurance, because the insurance is collected through part of the rent, part of our process is to let the insurance team know that those payments aren't being made. So it's just a point in there, but the support agencies are referred throughout.
It's not clear on that. It just says once it reaches 5 weeks arrears rather than 2 and 3 weeks that they'll be signposted.
Sure, that's something we can look at, updating that. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions from the members? Councillor Brown? No? Councillor Moore? Any more from you? No. Okay, I have got some questions myself. Actually, just starting with an observation that perhaps you could confirm, guys. So I assume the reason, just going back to Councillor Moore's question about the number of NOSPs that were issued versus the number of overall tenants in arrears, I assume that's because you have to get to 10 weeks in arrears before we serve an NOSP. And obviously most of our tenants' debt level is below the 10-week level. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So a kind of question from me, I think, just to summarise firstly, it seems that over the period of this last policy, so 21 through 24, our rent arrears have been stubbornly high, I would say, at between 2 and 3 million pounds, kind of going up over the period. I think they're the data point that we have in the report, so October 24, it's at 2.6 million pounds. So to put it in context, it's the same sort of level as we're expecting to spend on temporary accommodation, which we recognise in the council as being a serious problem. So, and as Councillor Moore, I think, mentioned, about 40%, so 2 in 5 of our tenants are in arrears. Do you think it would be fair to say that we've got a major ongoing issue here that we need to do something about in terms of the financials?
So I think reflected with us and lots of authorities up and down the country that the kind of ongoing pressures that have been called from COVID, especially around the courts action, I think, you know, we are expecting that to take the next 2 or 3 years to bottom that out. A lot of the reasons why we're looking at assimilating both of our arrears services so we can take a more holistic view of debt. So people that are in rent arrears can also be in council tax arrears and have other issues as well. So it is about taking that whole picture of debt and wrapping that support around the individual. I think when we talk around temporary accommodation, the risk is that these people will end up in temporary accommodation should they lose their property as well. So we have to get that balance that it is far more cost effective to keep people in their homes for as long as possible, because the reality of that is they will not be able, if they can't afford a social rent, they will not be able to afford a rent in the private rental sector. So the whole point of the service reorganisation, that whole picture of debt position, is to start to educate and develop our capacity of our residents at the very earliest interventional stage, because we know that prevention is really where we need our residents to be. And if residents are falling into arrears across a number of categories, even on the cheapest rents available in this borough, there's a serious issue there, and that is why we're looking to pool all of that support into one place to have the most early interventional approach that we can.
Okay, thank you. I mean, yeah, I think it says in the report that the current economic climate is kind of the main driver for the issue, and obviously, hopefully that will get better over time, but we're kind of stuck with it for the moment, aren't we? And I think I'm correct in saying that rents are going up by 7% for the next financial year, so that's not going to help either. Which kind of raises a separate point, which is, you know, if you accept the maxim that if you keep doing the same things, you're going to get the same results, do you think that a policy where we're proposing a few minor amendments versus the previous one is an appropriate response to what is a major ongoing issue?
So this is really a bridging arrangement, this policy. The reason we're having a full reorganisation of the rent service and pooling that within the wider arrears service is the wider arrears service are specialists. At the moment, rents sit within housing, which is a different skill set to that financial management of the arrears service. So the reason that obviously legislatively we have to have a policy, which is why we've made those major arrangements, but fitting that service within that wider arrears and one picture of debt allows us to fully reorganise all of our processes and procedures, and then we'll be merging all of the arrears policies and taking a different approach under a more arrears, financially specialist based team.
Thank you very much. So the targets, how are they calculated? Because, you know, going back to, obviously we talked about cost of living increases and so on, and we had a 2023-24 target which was a reduction against the previous year despite the climate, but we actually ended up with a 14% increase. Can you just talk me through how you calculate these targets, where they come from?
So the targets are set on the end of the previous year and a percentage reduction, which at the time obviously we thought we could reduce those arrears by. Unfortunately, with the continuing climate, we weren't able to reach that, so we will consider that when we're setting this year's targets. Okay,
but this happened 2 years running, hasn't it? Because we had, I think I'm right in saying that in 24-25, the target was a 4% reduction, and obviously we don't have the final numbers, but based upon the October data point, it's going in the opposite direction, isn't it? What's the plan for 25-26 based on that?
I think we will need to look at that when we're under a new team to consider how we're going to set those.
We are in an interim period where we are bringing two teams together from April, and they'll be coming under my remit with the Revenues and Benefits team. So we will look at all of the targets across the service, because bringing the two teams together, we're going to bring efficiencies, we'll bring better ways of working, and hopefully we can increase on the collection on previous years. But along with that comes all of the holistic help to give customers as well. So I would love to say we would change the target at the moment, but I think we need to get the teams together first to make sure we can come back with a proper answer on that.
Okay, thank you. I think we touched upon this already, but it appears from the report, page 17, for example, that issuing a notice of seeking possession is anecdotally quite an effective way of bringing things to a head. So we issued 264 of those, and you know, fortunately that only ended up with 4 people getting evicted. So only 1 out of 66 of those people actually got evicted, but it was successful. I think one time I read what the words were. So it says, yeah, the high volume of notices that were served resulted in residents contacting the team to make payment arrangements, most of which have been maintained. I'm quoting from the report there. So that seems to be fairly effective. Is it in the right place? Should it be earlier, I suppose, is the question.
I think at that point, residents are very desperate at that point. So you often get people relying on family and friends for their debt recovery, or putting quite extensive payment plans in place. Reduction of debt through behavioural change is always the most effective way of reducing debt. We don't want people to just clear a debt and become into arrears again. So as much as that's an effective mechanism, it's also not a sustainable mechanism. So we need to ensure that we do those preventative approaches, and that people are getting the right benefits that they need, that we're supporting into skills and employment, because actually without those things, there could be cyclical debt arrears. So it's all well and good clearing it, but if they're in arrears again in another 3, 6, 12 months, that's not an effective use. So as much as it's effective for us getting that stage, we need to do those earlier stages to try and prevent people from falling into those arrears again.
Thank you. Actually, on that subject, so it's clear that early response is key. Are we happy that the first response is automated rather than personal? Because if I'm reading your matrix correctly, the first thing that happens is after 2 weeks you get a letter or an email or whatever.
I think obviously we're assessing resourcing. When we look at the moment, it's a resourcing issue that, you know, because of the sheer volume of people that would miss at that stage, it would be very significant to resource. But as we move into the new arrangements, we will assess about what best place is it to intervene. We also have a team that's available, you know, for community engagement at all times for residents to talk to. So again, we can make sure that the website is fully up to date, so when people do get those initial letters, that we're signposting to the support that we do have existing all of the time in the council anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, because looking at the, I'm just going to make sure I get this data correct. So it appears that 42%, give or take, of our 3,800 tenants who are in arrears are in the smallest bracket, which would suggest that nipping it in the bud very early would be an effective tactic. Thanks for that. Let me just check my questions. Okay. Yeah, just one thing. Could you just talk me through the DHP mechanism and levels? Because again, with you know, 40% in sub 250, and I think even about 80% are in the sub 1,000 category. I guess that's where DHP's coming in.
DHP is, I mean, that's going to be another benefit of working under the new team. The DHP officers are part of that team as well. So that's us identifying anybody that's got a shortfall in rent that does need that additional help on top of their benefits, whether that's for spare rooms, etc. Then we could be looking at that. But yeah, at the moment the rents officers identify those cases, they can signpost, but we'll be working much more closely in the future.
And is there a range of support that we're able to give to tenants? You know, maximum, because it's a one-off payment, isn't it, DHP, is that right? No?
The discretionary housing payment is supposed to cover shortfalls in rent, but we also can pay towards rent deposit, rent in advance, or moving costs. And it's not a one-off. Someone can claim one for a 3-month period and come back later on if they need it again. There's a significant amount of money, and also from the HRA fund, additional money is put into that pot to be able to support more of our tenants, to help our local tenants as well.
Thank you very much. Let me just check. I think that's all of my questions. Yeah, it is. Any further questions from the Councillor Mars? Over to you again.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point. Obviously, the housing and benefits team and are all merging at the moment and making changes, which I think will be very efficient of what you're doing. It does coincide with obviously the council tax and rent. So obviously, what we've been discussing this evening with some of the potential observations that have been made by councillors, whether or not this policy will be coming back to us before it's implemented, whilst your team discusses how best to manage the particular issues we brought up.
So this, obviously under the social housing regulator, we have to have a rent arrears policy to be compliant with the social housing regulator. So this policy will cover the next year while the transitional arrangements are being made. And then Rob and Anna will be looking to come back in the next 12 to 18 months to refresh the complete assimilation of all of the arrears policies for the whole council into one policy.
Thanks, Councillor Mars. Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I just want to put this on the record because it doesn't quite get the justification it should do in the agendas, and it isn't a criticism of anyone here, is that how many of our tenants have these horrible, rotten, corrupt energy meters in their house? The weather's cold. You can't say to the energy company, I need another £10 on the key and I get paid at the end of the week. So they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And this is a premium. Yeah. And they are just absolutely wrong key meters. And as Councillor McGurran said just now, they're paying a premium for the use of the key meters. As a council, I wish our key meters weren't ripping off our tenants, but we are stuck with them with these energy companies. And our tenants, we can't expect them to sit in the cold, sit in the dark, not have their dinner on. because we've got these energy companies, pay me, pay me, pay me. And they've got very minimal amounts now to have emergency power to fall back on. And I just wonder if this committee could look at making some representation on this issue to these energy suppliers, because they are putting a gun to our tenants' heads. Pay me, don't worry about having a roof over your head, pay me. We've got shareholders, pay me, we've got shareholders. If your kids don't eat, tough, pay me. So I think at the very least this scrutiny committee can do is look at the effects of key meters on our tenants, because the shareholders of these energy companies are not our priority. If they've got money to pay for stupid adverts to interrupt a film on a Friday night, then they've got money to help people on key meters who can pay a fairer price.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, and yeah, I'm sure we'd be happy to review a policy that came forward on that topic. Any further questions on rent arrears from the members? No? Okay, thank you very much for your time and your input there. Okay, let's move on to the last agenda item tonight, which is the revised waste and recycling collection policy. So I think, Alan, you're going to present the policy, are you? Oh, sorry, Councillor McGurran's going to present it.
Yeah, I'll make some opening comments. It may be that Alan will want to come in or not, or just keep his powder dry for any questions. I don't know. Yeah, it's a very extensive policy document, so I hope you've read it all, because if you have any questions you ever asked on waste associated issues, you will be able to answer. And it'd be remiss of me not to thank Alan and James Hendry and the team, because an awful lot of work went into this. We had more workshops than I care to remember, making sure that we covered everything, and we hopefully got it all right. Obviously, you know, there are certain headlines in here that we know about, in terms of the single-use plastic bags will be introduced to replace the blue and white sacks, and the really big news that we'll be going back to weekly black collections come the end of April. But as I say, this policy goes way further than that. It covers every aspect of what we're doing already and the changes we're making. It also seeks to provide a sort of bridge, if you like, between what the national legislation is, the national guidance is, and what we want to deliver locally that works for our residents. And sometimes there's a bit of a juggling act that goes on there. But, you know, I think over the last year or two we have listened to what our residents have said, and, you know, the changes we're making should help us get us where we need to be. It's also a juggling act, in it, if I'm being honest, between recycling targets, one aspect of the environment, but the other aspect of the environment that we now know all about, in terms of the impact on our estates of not getting it right. So there's a juggling act there as well. Like I say, it's a very, very extensive policy. I hope we've covered everything. You're asked to consider and comment on this revised waste and recycling collection policy prior to its submission to Cabinet. I look forward to your questions and observations, and I'm sure so does Alan, who might have to help me out.
Thank you, Councillor McGurran. Alan, have you got anything to add at this stage? No? Okay, good. Okay, Councillor Myers.
Yeah, thank you. So I do know this policy quite well, because I saw it at scrutiny last year for the vast majority of it. Not a lot has changed other than what you've just mentioned about the two main items for your administration is doing. So really, in terms of everything else that's in that report, around the miscollection policy, the additional, sorry, excuse me, the timeliness of when those things will be done, the miscollections will be collected, the ways around clinical waste and how that works, was all in this report from the previous administration, and has remained the same, because it does work. It is a very, very well written document which Alan and James with Councillor Blake last year wrote, and obviously the only two changes have been to do with the administration's policy of weekly collections and changing the blue and white sacks. So don't really have much else to comment on really, but the fact that not a lot has changed in the work that the gentlemen, the officers have done over the last 2 or 3 years to write this strategy and this policy has been tremendous.
Can I come back, Mr. Chair, straight away?
Yeah, sure.
Actually, yeah, sometimes you just wonder, don't you? We don't seek to change a policy just for the sake of it. We seek to change implementation that doesn't work. So that's been our primary concern, to change the implementation that singularly failed. That's what we did. I would take slight issue with Councillor Myers. Like I say, the policy policy is great. You can have the best policy in the world, but if you don't implement it properly, it doesn't matter. So, you know, a lot of the document we've not changed. I wouldn't expect you to pick up on this, Councillor Myers, because there was a lot of very involved discussions about the policy document and subtle nuances of wording which we have changed. We haven't just changed the policy for the sake of it. Clinical waste, fine. Why would we change that? We wouldn't. However, you know, I wasn't going to make political points tonight, but you're kind of pushing me into that territory, which is unwise of you. But, you know, the fact of the matter was, the fortnightly black collections were a disaster. The sacks were a disaster. So, yeah, we had to change those. The wording of the policy we changed where it needed to be changed, but much of it is as it is. A lot of it can't really change because a lot of it is governed by national legislation anyway, and targets anyway. So we're not going to change things just for the sake of it.
Follow-up question, Councillor Myers? Okay. Councillor Westwick.
Yeah, so my comments would be, obviously it's a bit like making a cake. You can keep the absolute base, but if 2 ingredients don't work, it's absolutely screwed. Just sort of leading on to what Councillor McGurran just said as well. Obviously, it's not about being political, but I feel like what is in front of us is simply amazing for the residents. Getting the weekly collections back, getting a recycling scheme that actually works and is hygienic in so many different ways instead of the blue and white sacks. So what I see in front of me, regardless if it was used prior, there are 2 key points in here that is a massive difference, and like Councillor McGurran is saying as well, there have been other alterations throughout. So I think it's absolutely amazing, and thank you to all the officers and Councillor McGurran for all the hard work that you have done.
Thank you, Councillor Westwick. Councillor Moore.
I'm not sure about amazing, but anyway. I wonder if you can help me just to one comment in this. It says on page 48, Basildon Borough generates the highest amount of waste per household per year in Essex. So why? Do we know why that is? Why?
Thank you. That is a real good question. We've always struggled to find the exact answer as to why that is. It could be behaviours around purchasing goods and items. It could be behaviours around not knowing what to do with the waste items afterwards. But it has been a challenge for the Basildon Borough for a good number of years, and we are working to try and reduce that.
So that's all down to Councillor McGurran and his Amazon boxes, I guess.
I use Amazon very sparingly for reasons that I hope are obvious. However, what I would say is, yeah, no, you know, it is something that, you know, we have some knowledge of, but we do have a complete answer on why it's as it is. No, we don't. We're working on it. You know, the previous administration, I'm sure, was trying to ascertain exactly why it was. Alan's explained some. You know, we also, certain parts of the boroughs as well do have disproportionate amount of young families. Young families tend to have more waste. You know, it's not as simple as that. But there are certain parts of the county that have an older population. You know, inevitably have less waste. Some of the people that have, you know, there have been some people who weren't as keen to go back to weekly weekly black collections as others, predominantly older single households. Well, if you're in a borough that's got a disproportionate number of older single households, your overall waste is going to be less. But I'm not saying that it's as simple as that, but that is part of it as well. You know, so it's as usual, lots of different things going on. We're trying to get to grips with all of them and which bits are the most important.
Thanks, Councillor McGarry. Councillor Moore, follow up from you?
Yes, I just wondered what is the cost of the single-use sacks?
What, of one single-use sack or the whole?
What are we going to spend in
Alan may have to come back with a figure there. There is a saving involved in the single-use bags because obviously the bags themselves cost money, but in terms of collection, it's cheaper, it's quicker, it's easier for the crews, so we need less crews, we need less vehicles for the recyclable, because at the risk of demeaning the amazing efforts of Alan's guys, they literally just bung them in, which is a lot simpler than the present process we've got. So although there's the added cost of the bags themselves, the overall cost comes down. Alan, anything you say?
Thanks. I was just going to say, there is a forecast overall saving for moving to the disposable recycling sacks, bags, but you're right, I think we're budgeting around £400,000 a year for the sacks, or bags, sorry.
That rings a bell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of it will depend on the use, the amount of use they get and how quick residents go through the sacks as well, so that's something we'll have to monitor throughout the year.
Yeah, Councillor Moore?
Sorry, another question. So I put all my newspapers in my new sack. You put it on the truck takes it to wherever it takes it. So what happens to the disposable sack?
They're biodegradable.
Can I just say, first of all, Councillor Moore, I am delighted that you still consume newspapers. I am very, very pleased. I'm probably not so delighted about the newspapers that you choose to consume, but I am still delighted that you actually purchase newspapers. Alan, do you want to...
You've been looking at my sack.
Thanks. So you're right, the material will go to the processors and they'll go through a bag splitter, which will split the bags open to get to the material. The sack will then be siphoned off from that material stream, whilst the rest of the material goes through its sorting processes. And then once they collect a good amount of the plastic up, obviously that material is recyclable. And just to make a comment on that is that the sacks are made from recycled plastic as well. The bags, sorry, the bags are made from recycled plastic as well. So yeah.
Okay. Questions, Councillor Myers.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the, because on page 4 of the policy, page number 49 of the agenda, obviously we're going into the recycling rates which were included in the policy from last year, and the fact that Basildon had to increase those to meet environmental legislation. What's the current forecast in terms of going back to weekly black bin and the reduction in the recycling rates going forwards, and also the cost in terms of the recyclable amount that will be coming through from the waste disposal authority rather than the waste collection authority? Thank you.
Thank you. So this year we are set to forecast to reach around about 58-59% recycling rate. We are predicting that there could be a reduction in that, obviously moving to a weekly service. However, we are going to run a robust education campaign alongside the changes to try and limit any reduction in recycling rate. But yeah, we haven't forecast exact numbers because again, it's difficult to estimate, but we do predict a small reduction. Sure.
Sorry, can I just come in on that as well? I mean, just to be clear, as you know, has there been an increase in recycling rates the last couple of years? Yes, there has. Has it been uniform? No, it hasn't. what we experienced over the years before that was at one point we were doing okay, and it suddenly went down for all sorts of unaccountable reasons. So it's not a linear path with recycling. I think there's a lot of work to be done, as Alan said, on education. We've got a few months period where we'll be talking a lot about the waste collection service. There's an opportunity to educate, and I you know, call me naive, idealistic, you know, whatever. I do think also the fact that we've listened, we've changed the system, and it's a system people are familiar with. Okay, we're changing from the sacks to bags, but it's fundamentally the same system in terms of recycling, so people are used to it. So, you know, we're not changing it again to overcomplicate it. So I'm hoping that there'll be we'll have got a little bit of credit in the bank, that people will respond in the way we would like them to, and ultimately, if they don't, then, you know, if the bad behaviour we've seen previously continues, then we will look at proper enforcement action. But my personal feeling is, and obviously Alan says he expects a small tailing off on immediate recycling rates. I think it will be modest, and I think we will recover from that quite quickly with education and also you know, really good communications. Because again, I think people initially some people just didn't engage with it, and we need to make sure that the people that are engaging with it carry on engaging with it, but that some of as many of those as possible that didn't really engage with it, because we need to get there. And I agree with that, but we also need to think about the broader environmental issues, that if we're, you know, having a nominal increase in recycling rates when we've got black bags and pink bags all over our estates is not really that environmentally friendly way of doing things.
So, okay, if I just...
Yeah, sure.
And sorry, just in regard to your last point about financial impact, with Essex County Council, we are working closely with Essex County Council to monitor any impact on their waste disposal routes and the tonnages that will be going that way. So we are working closely just to make sure that it's not too much of an impact.
Okay, so are you coming in on that point, Councillor Smith? Because Councillor Brown's got a question as well.
Do you want to let Walter go first?
Yeah, so Councillor Brown, over to you.
I've got a question about how you measure recycling rates. It just seems really so much is hanging on it. The government's legislation and the changes were partly instigated by our performance against that measurement. I just wondered, how do you measure, because it seems very precise, that something that ought to have been recycled hasn't been recycled. What is the total waste? How much of that is being recycled? How much it should be composted? It just all seems, so much is riding on it, and it seems to be so difficult.
But it's correct. It's quite an easy measurement, to be fair. We get a lot of data sources from all our various recyclable materials and non-recyclable materials to calculate that. But it is a very risky. You're right. It's very risky because it fluctuates in great amounts and month by month as well. And all it can take is a dramatic event. For example, the football tournaments in the summer. That's often a good barometer, because our glass tonnages go through the roof in those summers because of the Euro or the World Cup's on. Things like that drastically improve our rate in that year. Yeah, well, exactly, yeah. But yeah, so that just goes to show that's one example of an event that can happen throughout a year that can really impact our recycling rate. But also, equally, things could have a negative impact on that. Weather, for example, it does have an impact. Cost of living, you know, people are buying less things, so that does have an impact as well.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a few points, so I'll go through them one by one if that's okay. First one, Councillor McGurran and other elected members, and of course my newbie Eddie Murphy, who's around Van Giel, wasn't as Van Giel Drive Cop. Be a great film if I made it, and all royalties came to me. With Alan Underdown. And one thing we noticed with the little tower blocks you got around Van Giel Drive is the bin for putting your black waste in, well used, but the recycling bin, I mean, if you was a New York style gangster killer, you could take your pick which bin and how many bodies you can put in there because no one was recycling. And it struck on me in these winter months, who on a cold winter's day would faff around, you come down the lift with your refuse and you're going to go out there and all the weather, paper here, metal, plastic there, right? Where if we go back to something like a pink sack, which we're doing, the blues and the whites, so that residents can do it in their kitchen, get 2 cheap little bins, so they do the separation with the bag in the bin, tie it up. If it's the middle of the week, the plastic and metal one's full, I'll take that when I take the kids to school. Do you see that in flats making an improvement? And if so, what can we do, as Councillor McGovern said, about education? Because I think if you want to up the recycling rates, that's an easy win to do, is the people in the flats.
Thank you. So we're not actually making any changes to the flats that have got communal bin sheds because historically contamination levels in communal bins are awfully high, and that often means the whole bin having to be emptied into the general waste freighters. So what we've done in flat blocks is install bins that have got apertures to try and reduce the contamination levels. On the whole, they tend to have worked well in reducing the contamination, but you're absolutely right, getting the usage of those bins is the tricky part. And again, we're going to follow that up with more education. We're not just going to roll education out across households, we'll be targeting flat blocks as well.
Yeah, if I just add on that, yeah, I mean, again, there's no getting away from the fact that flat blocks are an issue. We know that. There's no point me denying that. And the larger the flat blocks, the more of an issue it is, and the more you have problems with contamination. So very much a work in progress, I'm afraid. But, you know, it's something we're aware of. You know, first things first, get all low-hanging fruit, get the stuff that's relatively easy to get sorted, and then move on to the more difficult, challenging stuff. But yeah, and it does come down to education, because I think you know, some of the people in the flats, it's not necessarily they don't care, they might just don't understand or whatever. But yeah, there's plenty of work to be done there, but it's on our radar, definitely.
I can put the 2 points together, Mr. Chairman. The first one, why does this not mention the crunch?
Sorry, because it's well, okay, I'll mention the crunch if you insist. It's no, I mean the crunch has, I think, to be fair, made a significant difference in sorts of the street scenes we've been seeing or not seeing on our estates. The 5 weeks of the crunch over summer made a massive difference. And it's now down to the area committees to decide. I think we've got potentially 1 this financial year and 5 in the next financial year. If I would urge the area committees, it's up to the area committees, but given the popularity with residents, I would urge them to do that, and it helps everything. So it helps stop, you know, the lack of dumping of black bags on the streets we've seen and all the rest of it, fly tipping. You know, interesting. You know, I think you spoke to the crews as well. They would, you know, early on in the crunch last summer, they were saying a lot of this stuff would have ended up fly tip. You know, there's no getting away from that. So it does make a big difference. It is part and parcel of the policy. But I was trying to focus on the policy itself rather than the specifics, because I have mentioned the crunch quite a few times. But it's really popular and it's really effective. So great.
Last one, Mr. Chairman. I was watching this documentary last night, and it relates to grass cuttings. And it was a little village in Germany. It has these stalks that inhabit the town during the summer, and they cut the grass there so they can get some more, what do you call it, to eat. But they said all the grass clippings they cut, normally we leave it there so it feeds the lawn. They turn into electricity, this biomass malarkey. They didn't show you what they done. Why do we not do that with our grass clippings and try and make some electricity? And you never know, we could bring the tax down on the green waste a bit.
So we do currently do that. So our food waste gets processed in that way, got anaerobic digestion, and food waste goes off to plants to do exactly that. I don't believe there's many sites that do it for grass clippings at the moment, again because it needs the bacteria in the foods to break down to give off the gases to then to be turned to electricity. But absolutely all of our food waste that we're recycling is going to those plants.
Just if I may add to that, as you know, Councillor Smith, We are looking at the grounds maintenance contract. We may have some good news in that department quite soon, hopefully, we'll see. But obviously, if it were in-house, then, you know, it's under our control. We can look at all these things. How viable, how practical it is, off the top of my head, I don't know, but I'm sure we'd be looking at all and every option to improve the service. And, yeah. Listen, we will look at it, Councillor Smith.
Councillor Myers, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So obviously the policy states that all bins, etc., remain the property of the council. So when it comes down to the rollout of these blue and white bags, whenever that may be, whenever you start to do that, because I believe they come into action on the 28th of April, I think you said.
Said that, so it's not a secret. Yeah.
No, but I believe it's what you said is 28th of April. So what happens to the existing blue and white bags and people keeping those, because obviously they still remain the property of the council as they were handed out?
Give Ukrainians to plug the Russian tanks.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of months, information will be going out on the collection of the blue and white sacks. People will have the option, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, of if they want to keep them as a memento or whatever, or just for whatever reason they might want to keep them. If they do want to keep them, that is an option, because obviously there's a cost to collecting them and all the rest of it as well. So that is an option. So if you are very closely attached to your blue and white sack, you can have it, Councillor Myers. On me, the king of the bins, don't worry about it. But there will be information going out on how they're going to be collected. Alan, do you want to say any more on that?
I was just going to add, yeah, we do plan the ones that we do collect back in. We are speaking with a supplier around how they can take them off to process them for recycling as well, so they're not going to be just disposed of, which I hope will be a bit of a positive outcome from those bags.
Councillor Myers.
So just to follow up, obviously if people do decide to keep those, this policy document says they still remain the property of the council. So if they're misused in any way, for example, put over a speed camera, they might be. I'm just using an example or whatever, but they still, on this policy, belong to the council. So what is being done to say that if they're allowed to keep them, then they're therefore no longer the property of the council?
Yeah, we will communicate the options around what can be done with the reusable sacks. We are just firming up a couple of processes just to figure out the best way of collecting those in, because obviously every household's got multiple sacks, so it's not going to be a straightforward task of collecting them all back in for recycling, but absolutely we will look to.
Could I just make it clear, I'm sure that Councillor Myers wasn't suggesting that people should interfere with speed cameras because that would be a very bad piece of advice and criminal.
Thank you. Just before I come to you, Councillor Smith, any further questions from the members? Councillor Moore.
Yeah, just a point on page 49. It says that we need a recycling rate of 55% this year. So what was unclear was what was the recycling rate for 23-24, and can 55% be achieved this year?
So last year, I believe the recycling rate was around 44-45%. I haven't got the exact figure in front of me, and we are on track to meet the 55% target for this year.
Okay. No? Councillor Myers?
Yeah, it wasn't confirming that anyone should be making anything criminality, but just the first thing popped in, because I remember people putting, when they first went up, people putting tyres over them and all this stuff. It just for some reason came into my head. So is there going to be therefore some kind of waiver that someone has to sign, that therefore these bags, if they are misused, are no longer council property? Because if they are, you're saying that the bags still belong to the council, and if they're misused and you don't know who's done it, then of course the legalities around it are they belong to the council. From a practical point of view, protecting the council's reputation.
Councillor Myers, it's not too difficult to resolve, because after the April 28th period, we can amend the policy to say that they are no longer the property of the council. Up until April the 28th, they would be the property of the council, but after that, they're not. So I wouldn't worry too much, Councillor Myers, honestly.
It's for the clarifications because it's not in the policy at the moment.
No, because when the policy was written, we didn't have the date for when the new system was coming in. So, you know, just cut us a little bit of slack. Well, given the Horlicks your lot made of it, I think I would if I were.
Okay, any further questions from the committee members? I've got a few actually. Sorry, I'll go first if you don't mind. Given I'm on the committee, Councillor Smith. So yeah, I agree with the comments here. I think it's a very well written, very thorough policy. Thank you for that, and I appreciate the members just about keeping their comments on the right side of party partisanship as well throughout the process of the evening. So thank you for that. But I do have a few questions. First one is glass. So I know we've got a long-standing arrangement for dealing with glass, the orange crates. But just out of interest, why is that handled as a separate recycling category? And why is the collection not weekly, given we're trying to drive recycling rates up?
So I think glass being collected fortnightly is a suitable frequency. The majority of properties, the 55 litre crate is a sufficient capacity. The reason we've collected it separately and we've remained to do so at the moment is because it does bring in quite a healthy income for the council, because we sell that material to a processor. For this year, for example, I think we're due to bring in between £300,000 to £400,000 just for glass. So you can understand there's a real benefit for us collecting that separately. That's not to say that it doesn't get looked at in the future. Obviously, with simpler recycling and that policy coming in, it suggests that glass could be collected in with cans and plastics, but that's not a decision I think we should go down at this stage, but it's something we can certainly look at in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, on that, you know, like everything's constantly under review. You know, there's talk about increasingly going back to when we were kids, Mike, although I was a kid a bit before you were, admittedly, you know, you get a penny back on your bottle and stuff like that. So you know, and again, when Alan was talking before about consumer habits, and you know, there's a lot of work going on with companies who have not always been as responsible as they should in terms of packaging and stuff. So you know, things do change. At the moment, that seems the most appropriate system. But it's like everything, you know, some people will put the glass out every fortnight and it'll be overflowing. Some people will put it out half, and some people won't put any out. You know, they'll put it out once a month or whatever. You know, so you know there are obviously disparities, but at the moment that's the system that works. But as everything, you know, we can review it.
Great, thank you. So on the new white and blue recycling bags, or are they sacks? I couldn't quite, bags. So I think I'm right in saying that you basically get one of each per week in your free allocation. Is that right? I thought they're distributed. So that wasn't the question. I'll come on to the question in a sec. Is there a process and a charge for obtaining additional bags, as there is, for example, as I understand, for the food waste bags?
Yeah, no, there is a process. If you run out of your blue and white one-off use bags, they'll be available at Barleylands, but they'll also be available at the libraries as well, free of charge.
And to the first question, so each property will get 2 rolls of 26 of each, so that's 52. And we envisage that we'll do a second delivery sometime in the second half of the year, after about 6 months. But again, a lot of it will depend on how many of the sacks we think residents are using, and then obviously we'll have to make that judgment call on when we think it's an appropriate to another round of deliveries of the bags. But agreed, like Councillor McGovern said, they'll be available at libraries, Barleylands and the Basman Centre as well.
On that as well, you know, one of the things that you know I would say that helps out, you know, because let's just be neighbourly. If you're a single person living on your own and you've got loads of spare bags and you've got a young family next door, I'm looking at Ben, I don't know why, you know, you say, I've got loads of bags, do you want some? You know, let's help each other out a bit.
Okay, but we do charge for the food waste bags, don't we? Why is that?
Yeah, we charge for food waste bags, but the blue and white bags we won't be charging for.
Yes, so it's only additional food waste liners that we've the council decided to charge for, but they'll get one roll free per year.
Thanks. Okay, so last question from me. I mean, I've had a lot of observations from residents in Pitsea on my rounds about fly tipping and what's going to, I kind of said to them, we're moving to weekly black bin collections. We believe that's going to improve the fly tipping situation. And of course, the response is generally, well, what if it doesn't? So is there anything that you can tell us on enforcement, and is there anything we can actually do to stop people from...
First of all, it will, because common sense dictates that it will remove a lot of the problem, not necessarily all of the problem, but a lot of the problem. However, one thing I've been very clear on, and I've spoken to Alan and James and others about, is that it's not there's been no enforcement over the last year or so. There has been, but we haven't gone heavy on enforcement, because when you've got a system that's not working, it's not the right time to do it. So in the policy, there's lots of stuff about enforcement. So there are enforcement measures there. We might sometimes wish they were stronger than they are, but there are enforcement measures there. Once the new system is in place, I have always made it clear that if people are deliberately dumping bags in public areas on our estates, then that is the time we will start to go after them, and we will use whatever means we have to go after them within the constraints we operate under. Alan, anything you want to say on that?
No, it's fine.
Are there any specifics you can share with us in terms of what we can actually do?
So our enforcement officers will always use the education approach to begin with, because there may be a genuine reason or miscommunication, for example, why a resident has put sacks out incorrectly. But if they do not, if the education process has not worked, then they're able to issue fixed point notices for fly tipping, for the dumping of sacks in the borough. So absolutely, we can issue fixed point notices, and if they do not get paid, then obviously court action will follow.
Any kind of intelligence on how we catch them? Because I think this is the nub of people's concern, really. Is if someone's lobbing out a black bag in the dead of night onto a pile somewhere, then how do we know who it is?
There's things there, Mike, I don't want to say too much about, because if I tell them how we catch them, then the people get better at not getting caught. But there are ways of catching people, and we are looking at ways of improving that system as well. Yeah.
Lovely, glad to hear it. Any further questions from members? Councillor Mars.
Just one further observation and point. When the pink bags were around, and obviously we're going to the blue and white bags, sacks, whatever you want to call them, still sacks, bags. A lot of people, especially sort of in cul-de-sacs, would put them on green areas in the middle, so the blue and the white, these new bags. Whereas with the current sacks, where a lot of people kept them outside their houses or had their numbers on them, and there was contamination in that bag that wasn't taken, what is the sort of enforcement role going to be on people dumping non-recyclable waste into these blue and white bags?
Thanks. So the policy states for residents to put their waste containers at the edge of their properties. So if there are sacks of waste being sort of placed at these so-called communal points, then in theory that could be classed as dumping. Again, though, I don't believe we should go heavy on those residents straight away, because they might seem to be trying to do the right thing, and that would probably be an education approach, certainly in the first instance. But you're right, that is a risk that could happen again, because that is it was a practice that was followed for years, and the waste system that currently is, you're right, that did cease all of that. But that's something we'll have to monitor, and we'll have to see what impact it has in certain areas of the borough.
But again, on that, it's about continuing, where the good behaviour is happening, continuing that good behaviour, because people have got into that habit. So let's carry on that habit. Just use the bags rather than the sacks in the same way. And we have got a couple of months. There will be an awful lot of education, and the policy is very clear on where you should be putting your rubbish, whether it's recycling or your black wheelie bin.
Any further questions from the guys? Councillor Smith, yeah.
Thank you. Most of us here should see this bizarre press release from Essex County Council about this is fly tipping month and everything else. Well, when you look at your star sign, you think, oh, it's lining up, I might be able to get a slot at Pitsy Tip. The system now at Pitsy Tip is just encouraging fly tipping. I would always condemn people for fly tipping, but when you've got a system that is designed to make it impossible for people to go down there, queue up, wait their time, get rid of their rubbish, whereas what's happening now, you're getting more fly tipping. We, as Basildon Council, get the cost of collecting that fly tipping and the cost of disposal and the landfill tax, because counties designed a system to be like that. Where are we pushing back? And also, what are we doing to promote our barley lands? Because apart from stuff for dumping, everything else that you can recycle, you can take to barley lands. There's no appointments, you drive in, you take your stuff there, you sort it out and it's gone. Barley lands is a great success, we should share as much as we can. But the system county has imposed at Pitsy Tip does not work, which feeds into the success of the crunch.
Yes, so you're right. Barleylands is a good success, and I think we need to communicate that more. The only limitations with Barleylands, is right, is it doesn't take all of the waste that Pitsy Tip takes. However, residents, when they are made aware of Barleylands, they find it a really good facility because you're right. There's no queues. It's very quick and easy to dispose of recyclable items. So I'd encourage any resident, if they want to dispose of recyclable items that we can take there, please use Barleylands because it's far quicker and efficient.
Yeah, and it's just, I echo those comments. Barleylands is great. It's just a shame that there's, certain waste issues it can't take. But, and we'll certainly look at the comms, because there's going to be an awful lot of comms on the waste system in the coming months. So we'll look, that's one of the factors we will definitely look at. I don't think I need to tell Councillor Smith, when it comes to Essex County Council, they don't always listen to Basildon very much. But it's a momentous day, and changes are going to come, so we'll see where that leads. Baz exit.
Questions? No. Okay, I think that's us done. Thank you very much for your participation in the meeting this evening, and thanks for presenting to us. Safe journey. Sorry guys, that is not the end of the meeting. We've got work programme item 6 on the agenda. So let's just have a look at that. Sorry. Okay, so shall I run through this? Or are you going to? Do you want
me
to?
to
Yeah,
quickly?
could
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just briefly, the report provides members with an opportunity to consider and identify items for the committee's work programme. I refer members to page 82, which sets out the items for future meetings. So the report is asking members to note and endorse the items currently identified for the 2024-25 work programme and consider any further items that it wishes to add, and also notes the Cabinet Forward Plan and considers any items that fall within its remit. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any questions or comments from the floor? Councillor Myers.
In one of my questions to do with the rent arrears policy, once the new team has formed together, we'll bring that back to have another look, please.
Any further comments from the members? No. Okay. I think we are actually done now. No? Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor Moore. Sorry.
Yeah, should we not include in the work programme a review of the waste policy in, I don't know, June or July, something like that?
Yeah, we potentially could. I mean, guys, any thoughts on when might be an appropriate moment in terms of when we've got information?
I'm not being difficult, Councillor Moore. I mean, given we're only introducing the new system at the beginning of May, effectively end of April, beginning of May, that seems a little soon. I've no problem with reviewing it. I'm not sure that's the right time. Alan, any thoughts?
Just a thought from me. Perhaps we will be looking at the additional bin criteria at a later date. We didn't want to touch it at the moment, did we? because we didn't want to affect residents getting that much needed additional capacity for their waste, but it's something we will monitor over the course of the next year once the service beds in, so perhaps we could look at it, I would say perhaps next year. I think I would want to allow at least sort of 12 months to bed in, given the amount of time it took for the last system to bed in as well. I would say, yeah, the more time to bed in, the better.
Are you happy with Chodman's, Councillor Moore? Yeah, thank you. Okay, right, I think we're all done. Thank you very much. Secretary Hand.